In this video, we will continue our look at the impresarios, and we will kind of see the end of the impresario system come about. So the impresario system, just kind of quick review. Under the colonization laws, impresarios were responsible for settling Texas. They acted as land agents. They would recruit people. They provided settlers with loans and supplies, and they act as the colony's representative to the Mexican government. And further services, impresarios were paid with large grants of land. So they would get lots of land for bringing in lots of people. Most settlers in impresario colonies came from the United States. To obtain permission from the Mexican government to own land in Texas, these settlers had to agree to three things. So these three things, this is what you need to know. You are to become a loyal citizen of Mexico, you are to become Catholic, and you are to actually live on the land. You couldn't just like get this land and then not come and move here and live on it. You were supposed to come and live on the land. They were trying to avoid land speculators, people that would come in and buy lots and lots of land or get lots of land and then sell it at a profit. Well, what really drew the settlers was the land. Okay, there was basically two forms of sizes of land you could get, or a combination. So a labor was for those that were going to be a farmer. You could get 177 acres, which is a lot of land, plenty of land to farm. Or a sitio, which was 4,428 acres for raising livestock. Or if you said you're going to do both, you could get a combination of both, 4,605 acres. And in addition to getting lots of land for basically nothing, you paid no taxes for the first 6 years. You didn't have to pay taxes. You didn't have to pay for, you could import goods up to like $2,000 in value, which is a lot of money back then, without paying taxes on that. And then for the next 6 years, after those first 6 years, you only paid half of the taxes. And so there was a lot of incentive to move there. We've talked about Moses Austin, so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about him again, but he kind of got this whole thing started. He dies, his son carries it on, and we talked about last time about how with the help of Erasmus Seguin, he's able to successfully get his colony going. He was careful, though. This is one of the things. He was careful to recruit only honest, hardworking settlers with the skills needed to establish a colony. He was very careful in not getting just anybody here. He didn't want, because Texas had a reputation, and some areas had a reputation around here of a lot of outlaws and things like that coming, and he did not want that type here because he was in charge of them and managing them, and he didn't want that headache to deal with. So we talked about the old 300. They lived in log cabins usually. Life was hard. It was rustic. They had to make their own clothes, soap, tools. The Karankawa Indians were not too happy that they were there, and so there was a lot of fighting that could happen, and they didn't have schools at first, especially. By 1825, the colony's population had grown to about 1,800 people. Almost 450 of them were African slaves. Here's a replica of what a settler's home near San Felipe de Austin would have looked like at that time. So you can see all the different impresarios that ultimately come here. Very few of them actually are successful at all. Stephen F. Austin, Martin de Leon, Lorenzo de Zavala, and Green DeWitt are really the only ones that are very successful. And Green DeWitt and Martin de Leon are really the only ones other than Stephen F. Austin that are successful. You can see here, just talks a little bit about Martin de Leon and Green DeWitt, where their contracts were and what they were supposed to do and what they did. And then this is a cartoon kind of showing this idea that this land needed to be settled. Well, of course, Native Americans didn't feel like it needed to be settled. It was already settled, and they had settled it, and it was their land. And so these colonies are unwelcome by those Native Americans that are already living there. Some other impresarios, in particular, we need to talk about Hayden Edwards. He received a contract to bring 800 families to the area of East Texas where Nacogdoches in 1825. there was already a significant number of settlers that were there, and these are known as squatters in some cases, and they came into conflict with the newly arriving settlers because they're saying, no, this land is ours, and Hayden Edwards is saying, no, it's not because you didn't have it legally, and so there's a big problem. Ultimately, Hayden Edwards also then declares independence and calls it the Republic of Fredonia, and soldiers from Mexico and militia from Austin's colony helped end this revolt. So notice Stephen F. Austin, he's like, no, this is not what we're about. This is, if something like this happens, this is the very thing that will bring more attention to what's going on here and more trouble. Mexico's not going to trust us if these kind of things happen. So he is important. He's like, no, we're going to help to stop this because we don't want this going on either, in an effort to show his loyalty to Mexico because all of what Mexico has done to allow them to come there. So this is on the picture over here. This is the Republic's flag. This is a picture of Hayden Edwards and where his colony would have been, his land grant colony would have been. So not too long after this, a couple of years after the Fredonian Rebellion, Mexico is beginning to be concerned about what's going on in Texas. And so they send Mir y Terán to find out what's been going on there. And he leaves Mexico City on November 10th, 1827. And he reaches San Antonio on March 1st, kind of surveys the area, goes to San Felipe de Austin on April 27th, and on up to Nacogdoches on June 3rd of 1827. He traveled with a military escort, a mineralogist, Jean-Louis Bandelier, who was a botanist, a zoologist, and an artist, and Jose Maria Sanchez y Tapia, who was a cartographer and artist. And each of them all, kind of kept diaries of this, and we have access to those diaries and can see kind of their report and what they saw and what they learned about the region. Not just the what was going on politically and what was going on with the settlers, but even what was going on, what the land was like and what it offered. Because of illness and muddy roads, the commission was not able to leave right away, and so they actually end up staying in East Texas until January of 1829, when he started for Mexico City. And ultimately, in his report, he recommends strong measures. He says, okay, we've got to stop the United States from acquiring Texas. There's so many settlers here. They're Americans, and they act as if they are not really even part of Mexico. And so we've got to do something about that. And what is done about that is the law of April 6, 1830. They take his many suggestions, and there's many different parts of the law, but kind of the biggest two parts are the prohibition of slavery. Slavery, no more. There's not going to be. You cannot bring slaves in. There's not going to be any more slavery. Those that are born to slaves would be free, and it closes the borders of Texas to Americans, and so no more immigration from America. That wasn't exactly in Mir y Terán's report, but it was part of the law of April 6, 1830. And so this is a big wake-up call. Wait a second, all of a sudden there is this feeling that, things are not going as well as we felt like they were going here in Texas. And so there's a lot more concern all of a sudden about that relationship. In particular, Stephen F. Austin. Stephen F. Austin has been kind of the leader that has made things work between the Americans that have moved here and the Mexican government. He has kept things working, and now all of a sudden it appears things are not working, and he is very concerned what's going to happen next. And of course, we know ultimately what happens next, but the details of how that comes about are going to kind of be what start our next unit with the road to revolution, to the Texas Revolution. So a couple of things. So the Empresario system ends. What was the result? Well, in 1820, before Stephen F. Austin, there was less than 3,000 Mexican or American settlers in Texas. There was many Native Americans, about 25,000 by 1835, including over 2,000 slaves. So you've got a dramatic increase in the population of Texas in 15 years. But Mexico is very worried about the settlers' loyalty. And by the mid-1830s, Texas was divided between Anglo settlers in the north and the east and Tejanos in the south. And that is the end of that will ultimately be the end of the Empresario system and American colonization in Mexico and Texas, Mexico.